Mia, if you could tell us a little bit about the whole process of how we obtained the files and what the key findings are.
Sure. So I write for Michael Schellenberger, and last May, I think it was May, maybe not, maybe April, Michael received internal files, from an internal messaging forum of WPATH. And we initially tried to turn, this was, 70 pages of documents that we initially tried to turn into a series of articles for Michael's Substack Public. And it very quickly became apparent that there was just too much information. We could not do this justice. And so Michael moved me over to his nonprofit Environmental Progress, and we turned it into a think tank report. It is a 70-page report that uses the words of WPATH members as the framework and then I built around it the history of WPATH and an explanation of the science. And the main findings are that, one, this is not a medical group, and two, this is not a group engaged in science. It's not scientific. The reason that I say it's not a medical group, it's not medicine, is because the first rule of medicine is do no harm. And when you read these internal communications, you very quickly realize that these are people who are doing harm and that they know they're doing harm, and yet they appear not to have very much concern about that. So evidence of harm would be definitely bearing in mind that this is a treatment protocol. WPATH advocates for young people to be placed directly onto this medical treatment protocol because they do not believe that they view psychotherapy very suspiciously as if it's conversion therapy. And so they'll put them on this very harsh treatment protocol of cross-sex hormones. And testosterone has very debilitating side effects for females. There's one conversation about a 16-year-old girl who has large liver masses, and her oncologist and surgeon believe it's because of the testosterone. And another WPATH member shows up to say, oh, I had a colleague who died of liver cancer, and the doctors also thought it was due to the testosterone. And then that's the end of that. No one raises any concerns. No one seems concerned that maybe this treatment protocol has a fatal outcome for some women. There's also talk of debilitating side effects, less severe, but still very, very debilitating, such as vaginal atrophy, uterine atrophy, pain, bleeding, painful orgasms, males experiencing erections that feel like broken glass. And in the conversation, no one shows up with any science to say, okay, if you have this, you see a patient with this, here's the study, this is what you're supposed to do. All you see is people showing up saying, oh, I had a patient that had that and I tried this, or somebody, a trans-identified person will show up and say, oh, I had that symptom and this is what I did. And there's very little science in there, and there's very little concern for these young women who are being placed on this treatment pathway. There's also evidence of very severely mentally unwell people being allowed to consent to life-altering medical interventions that it is very likely they do not fully understand and cannot cope with the arduous recovery process. There's people with dissociative identity disorder being allowed to consent to genital surgery. There's a therapist who says in 15 years, she's only ever refused one patient a surgical referral, and that's because the patient was in active psychosis in the assessment and was hallucinating. There's very clear evidence that they know that minors, adolescents cannot understand lifelong sterility. One says it's talking to a 13-year-old about fertility preservation is like talking to a blank wall. There's there's the way they talk about detransitioners, they trivialize it, they blame the victim, they downplay the trauma that these people go through. And then there's also conversations about these non-binary surgeries, which to me shows just how far off the rails this organization has gone, that they're not, this is absolutely not medicine, and it's not science. When you're creating, like, these non-binary surgeries would be nullification surgeries or the creation of a second set of genitals. Nobody is monitoring this. Nobody is following up with these patients. This is actually not even, you can't even call this an experiment.
Well, that's quite something. So what you actually found evidence that people with developmental issues and have been offered, or their consent has been accepted, and the parents as well, not knowing that these are experimental procedures.
Yes, there's a comment in there about how even the parents, so this is about minors consenting to hormone therapy. And there's talk about, how difficult it is to talk to a 9-year-old about fertility preservation because, they don't understand. And another endocrinologist says, well, we're explaining these things to people who haven't even had high school biology yet. And then somebody replies that, yes, sometimes even the parents, it's concerning when even the parents don't understand what they've signed off for. So this is not, the parents are not being informed. And if you look at the internal communications, you can see the culture inside WPATH. This is a group that it presents itself outwardly as a scientific and medical group. And on the inside, it's just engaged in political activism.
Yeah, it's amazing. Stella O'Malley, from Genspec's point of view, what are your reactions and what would you like to see happening in the aftermath of this?
I think it's been revealed with the WPATH files that we have a lot of clinicians who have been propelled into representations of international best practice when they're not supported by an evidence base. But not only that, they seem to be haplessly allowing activists to lead the way. And so when you look at the files and when you look at the verbatim conversations that were taking place, you will see that activists are effectively admonishing surgeons who are seeking things like protocols and policies. So, for example, one surgeon is talking about procedures that are not known to nature. They're not like anything in nature. So, and he's talking about things like phallus preserving vaginoplasty. He's also talking about nullification. He's also talking about minimal depth vaginoplasty. So these are really extreme body modifications that weren't known or heard about 10 years ago or any time preceding that. And this surgeon is seeking a policy or a protocol around these surgeries. And he's admonished by an activist because he's told this is a cisnormative way of looking at things. And policies and protocols is frankly something that should be done away with while we allow activists lead the way. So it's moved into the, you're well aware of the idea that doctors are on very high salaries because they're highly qualified, because they've studied a lot, and they run by the principle of first do no harm. Now, rather than first do no harm, we seem to have moved into a much more consumer-driven buyer beware, where the activists are saying we don't need protocols, we don't need policies, we don't need to be cautious, and we don't need to worry about doing harm. Instead, we need to be led by what the person in front of us wants. The client is leading it. Rather than being client-centered, it's client-led. And it's frankly very dangerous because the harms are being recounted at this stage. We know that the detransitioners the numbers are increasing all the time. We've got Detrans Awareness Day next Tuesday. And I know when I first started following the Detrans subreddit, which I urge reporters to follow, there was less than 1,000 in the subreddit. This was in 2019. Now there's over 50,000 members on this subreddit. Not all of them are detransitioners. Some of them are like me. The moderators estimate about a third of them. 2/3 of them are detransitioners. About a third are people like me. So 2/3 of 50,000 is a phenomenal number of people who are saying, I was young, I was vulnerable, I was in mental health distress, and I needed care from doctors. I didn't need to be treated like a customer who could pick and choose the body modifications that I wanted.
Well, this is what I took from the report as well. You know, when you have children and adolescents thinking that they can actually, well, for example, in the case of males, male boys, thinking that they can go on estrogen, but they do not want breasts. You know, so they're sort of trying to pick and choose what kind of anatomy they should have, and some people want to have both set of genitals and some people none. I mean, it's completely absurd. So for any doctor to actually to approve to these sort of procedures is highly unethical, because this doesn't exist in nature.
The WPATH files reveal that the clinicians know that some of these, for example, some of the children don't understand the impact of the hormones that they are being put on. So, for example, they might want some facial hair, but they don't want a deep voice, or they might want other things. And you know, one WPATH clinician says, you know, you might think you're not binary, but hormones are binary, which I think very much reflects a flippant response to distressed children who are not mentally equipped. They don't have the education and they don't understand it. And the WPATH files reveal that the children don't understand it. One clinician says it's like talking to a blank wall when they're talking about infertility. They say this is like they haven't done high school biology. They don't understand the impact of lifelong infertility or lifelong sexual impairment. And they're signing it away. And the low medical literacy of the parents has also been revealed in the WPATH files. So what we have here is clinicians who are allowing people who are not informed to give consent. And so it's making a mockery of the concept of informed consent.
And Stella, you've been in this field for quite some time now. It was my mistake. I should have taken the round and let you all introduce yourselves in the beginning, but it was a bit all over the place. Would you care to tell the Icelandic audience how long you've been in psychotherapy and how you got into this in the first place?
Yeah, I'm a psychotherapist. I don't know how long, maybe 20 years, certainly 15, 20 years. Working in Ireland. I always worked in general practice, and I've just become involved in gender issues since 2017. And I had a film out in 2018 called Trans Kids, It's Time to Talk. We founded GenSpec to advocate for a healthy approach to sex and gender, because we believe extremists have taken over WPATH and we need a more reasonable approach. We've written a gender framework, which is a non-medicalized approach to gender. I had gender distress as a child for many years myself. So I have an awful lot of sympathy for people who get transfixed by the idea. And there's never been anything more alluring than you can be a different person with a different name and a different identity. And so I had that for many years, but I came out of it and I'm now comfortable in my own body. And I'm glad I'm a mother. I'm glad I had the freedom to have children. And it's probably the most important thing about me. And so we have founded GenSpec to offer an alternative vision, because we believe WPATH have completely lost their way. And we think it's very important that other alternative options are seen. People act as if there's only one approach to gender distress, which is a very narrow-minded view of it. There's lots of different approaches, for example, to depression, to OCD, to panic, to anorexia. There's loads of different approaches. To say that there's only one solution is frankly engaging in snake oil salesmanship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can you tell us briefly what happened in WPATH when the activists sort of took over? Because there's such a dramatic shift from the standard of care volume 7 and now to volume 8. For example, Sweden has actually cut ties with WPATH, but the Icelandic chief medical officer just told me last couple of weeks ago that they are adhering to the standard of care volume 8 from WPATH, and they rely on the science, as scary as that sounds. And they hadn't even heard about the gender framework, which I did send to them. So I hope they will study it in the aftermath. But what actually did happen in WPATH?
I think Mia recounted this very well in the WPATH Files report, where she describes how, like, she gives a history of WPATH, and it shows that Standards of Care 7 moved beyond what would be called as standards of care into what would be their self-identified standards of care. It's not just a moniker, it actually means something. It has to meet certain criteria. And since Standards of Care 7 and Standards of Care 8, it doesn't meet that criteria. It has become a prescriptive recommendations that don't align with what would be usual among the kind of medical protocols that we would see very often. But in 2012, they released Standards of Care 7, and they demoted effectively psychotherapists like myself from offering a therapeutic process to instead being facilitators for medical transition. And then in Standards of Care, and they also brought in the affirmative model. The affirmative model has no evidence base. It has come in around the last decade, 15 years, and it means you affirm everything that the client is saying, i.e. you're client-led, not client-centered, i.e. whatever the client, no matter what age, and that's the quote in WPATH, no matter what age. So it could be a very young child who says that they are this name, they are that pronoun, they should do whatever they want because they are leading the way. And I think it's our job in society to protect the vulnerable and to protect the young. And so we don't let them lead the way. Instead, we're client-centered. We listen to them. We don't let them lead the way. But Standards of 8, and I'd be delighted to hear what Mia says about this, but Standards of 8, it literally deviated from all recommended medical procedures when it started talking. It has a chapter on the unique identity, which is an appalling chapter of history that we'd left behind. It also has a chapter on non-binary, but it had a chapter on ethics, and it was available in the pre-published content, and then they chose to remove the chapter on ethics. So there is no chapter on ethics in the Standards of Care 8. And not only that, but they have chosen to kind of reframe the detransition experience from a very harrowing, devastating experience to something that's just moving along a gender journey, which is diminishing the awfully sad stories of people who choose to medically transition and then realize it has not worked out. They try to reverse the process and often find out that they can't reverse the process, and they're left in a no man's land. For example, a female might have a very male voice, facial hair, chest hair, a mastectomy, hair on their back, hair on their bum, and a very masculinized face and body. And they're trying to live now as a female. It's incredibly difficult, and you'll find out more in Detrans Awareness Day, but it's not something to be diminished. I'm sure Mia and Carrie would have plenty to say about the Standards of Care too.
Yeah, if Mia or Carrie, if you would like to barge in here.
Sure. So the way from when I was reading about it, when I was researching, to me, the ideological shift started to occur in the late 1990s. WPATH Standards of Care 5 came out in 1998, I think. And the Standards of Care 5 was at least attempting to provide some guidance to place guardrails around this very intense medical pathway. Dr. Stephen Levine was the chair of the committee, and he insisted that there be two referral letters from mental health professionals before starting treatment. And right then, the president of WPATH at the time did not like that requirement and immediately commissioned Standards of Care 6, which was published just a year or two later, was almost exactly the same, but only required one letter. So there's the ideological shift right there. And then throughout the 2000s, the first decade, the more and more activists joined the organization, because bear in mind, this is an unusual professional organization in that anyone can join. You just pay your fee. So there are medical professionals in there, but there are also activists, human rights lawyers, people who are transgender and have an interest in gender medicine. And then Standards of Care 7 obviously was the big shift towards affirmation. You cannot question the gender identity, you must affirm it. And then in that decade from Standards of Care 7 to Standards of Care 8, a very major shift occurred. There's a really interesting video of Marcy Bowers, who is now the president of WPATH, in 2018 at the WPATH conference in Argentina, I think, encouraging the Standards of Care 8 committee to be bold and, encouraging surgeries for adolescents, that you shouldn't have to wait until you're 18 to get these surgeries. And just, it was a sort of rallying cry, be bold. I've listened, and Bowers even says, that he'd asked trans activists within the organization, and they had come back with reduce gatekeeping, reduce the barriers to care, and provide access to this treatment. And that's what they did. You see it in the document. That's what they did.
Can I add one extra thing about the Standards of Care? There is no mention of the word experimental in the Standards of Care, and that's not there for a reason, because you would with the word experimental, you would receive insurance in various countries around the world, and therefore you would have healthcare insurance to medically transition. By removing the word experimental, they are allowing people to get healthcare insurance. And not only that, it's not experimental because they don't have a control group. There is no control group. So they're probably right to say, when Mia said they're not scientific, they don't run any scientific research around these procedures. Instead, they recommend them without any guardrails, in very much the context of what Mia is saying: be brave.
Yeah, like in the context of Iceland, we've had self-ID here from 2019, and which was legislated completely with stealth. Nobody knew about the legislation until it was already passed. So women's group or any interest groups, they could not even react to it. But that's the dental document style. But what they did, and because they are stressing very much here now, especially here in Iceland, you even have radio shows from the Icelandic radio broadcaster highlighting that this is not a mental illness, and the law of the land has made sure or settled that question. But what what people don't know is this shift from the DSM-5 over to ICD-11, because gender dysphoria as such is still classed as a mental illness, but gender incongruence is classed as a sexual health issue.
Yeah, and I could jump in. I'm Dr. Carrie Mendoza. I'm in the United States. I'm an emergency medicine physician with a subspecialty in medical toxicology, which is all about the adverse effects of drugs and overdoses. And I work with a nonprofit called the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, and help on the medicine side to depoliticize medicine and help clinicians be able to talk about different complex topics. And obviously in our environment, talking about the concerns around trans healthcare, people have been bullied into silence. So I got involved to try and help raise awareness. And I think, Mia's report is so excellent, and all the work Stella's done. And I think it's important to understand that this has all moved into a different phase. And that phase is a deep infiltration into actual medical practice, right? Into clinics, into hospitals, into training. We have in the States, in the medical schools, a subspecialty training now in trans care. And so the point around that is to understand what guidelines and standards of care really are, because this has all been sort of grafted onto what our normal understanding and trust is. If, for example, if you have a heart attack or a stroke, there's guidelines and standards that have been developed by the specialty body, the American College of Cardiology. And so when I work at the hospital, we follow their guidelines because there's a trust in the high quality work that the newest practice is the best for patients. But within that, there's debate, there's transparency around how things have developed, there's discussions, there's a reassessment if there's a bad outcome in a case. There's a constant iteration to focus on what is going on with a protocol. So with these so-called guidelines and in WPATH's role, they've been placed at the center of reference by other associations in our country and in Europe too, saying, hey, this is an area of specialty care. We want folks with this gender dysphoria to do as well as we can. And there's a group over here that has really specialized in that. So we're going to refer to them as the specialists. And what's happened is all these organizations have kept referencing WPATH as following our basic norms. And what we have found, and I know people have been working on this for years, and we want to acknowledge all their good work, but what we found now with the files is actually the proof in their own words that they're really not at all following what the safety of medical practice and the norms are around guidelines. And there's so many people out there in clinics and hospitals who are caught in the crosshairs, meaning that they think they're safe because they're practicing guidelines, and then they see the guidelines are confusing. We don't know what to do. And you see that in the files. I mean, just the basic concept of making a proper diagnosis. They are questioning, is this the right person I should be doing the treatment? What do I do with these treatments? Who do I select as the rate? So just the basic practice of medicine is showing there that they are unclear about it. And then just issues with adverse effects. There's a comment about, the hepatic tumors. Someone, obviously in the thread, they're talking about management with an oncologist, which is a cancer doctor. And, the adenomas are something that can be, precancerous, cancerous. It's unclear from their conversation, but seeing an oncologist is saying, wow, this is really serious. And the fact that they don't then raise alarm bells and say, wow, we need to alert our community because we need to make sure we understand what dose people might be on, or what's going on here, what other multiple medications are they on that could be causing worse adverse effects. That is the basic practice of medicine with guidelines and standards. So just the files and the information in there are so important to understand that they've really broken this chain of trust, and the evidence, is right there.
This is the point where I actually want to tie in Jesper from Denmark, because you have actually been testing the politicians in Denmark quite a lot on the lack of diagnostic apparatus. So if you could tell us a little bit about that process.
Yes, we are an NGO, an anti-woke LGBT organization, which was sort of formed as a counter move to the big one here, which is called LGBT plus. Denmark is incredibly woke. That is a highly disingenuous organization which has damaged the LGBT cause here. I mean, I'd like not to say irreparably, but it's certainly done loads of damage. Which, of course, you have similar organizations in your countries who have operated in the same way. So we were formed to counter that. And on the top of our list, obviously, as it needs to be for anyone with a thinking mind, is an immediate cessation of the child sex change operation and medicalization. So what we did was, first of all, to find out exactly what were the numbers, what was going on. and they conformed completely to the standards of care. And here I use the word care extremely loosely. We were, of course, aghast at what we saw. So we talked to politicians about creating a bill that would put a stop to it, knowing full well that that wouldn't go through, because governments in charge usually don't adopt proposals raised against them. However, what it did do was create a discussion about this, which has never taken place before. Now, this wasn't something that was adopted by a process of legislation in our parliament. This was done as an administrative measure behind everybody's back, I'd like to say. How, even though we've discussed all kinds of other highly ethical issues, such as abortion limits and whatever else we're discussing, but however, this thing, for some reason, wasn't proper to discuss in Parliament. So what we did was have this discussion, and we got our first case, very unfortunate case of a sort of psychologically damaged young man who transitioned at the end of his 20s, regretted and told his story. And that sort of got things going. And he offered us his complete medical history, which of course included all the warning signs, yet comorbidities galore, which were not in any way heeded. And after just one conversation with a psychologist, he was off to hormone treatment. And then came the surgery, and then he regretted. Now, he's a very courageous man, I have to say. And he went on media and told his story. And what he also did do, which was very clever, is that he contacted his physician, the lady in charge of this medical procedure, who had done this to him, and he complained and said, you know, I was borderline. There is all indications in my medical files that this was exactly what was at stake, and you didn't heed that. And now look at me. And she came back with a letter, which was as mind-boggling as anything could be, which she, verbatim, she says, well, you have to understand that we don't have any diagnostic tool at our disposal to decide whether or not we are making the right, or we are doing the right diagnosis. And she also said the only thing we have is listening to whatever people tell us when they come in to the clinic. Now, this is verbatim. And of course, basically what she admitted, which is what we all know, is that this is guesswork. This is crystal ball diagnostic work with dire consequences. And what he says, his name is Peter. He lived for like some years as Ava, and is now back in his mere body. Of course, now he has to take testosterone because he can't produce that anymore because of the fact that he's been, well, he's now effectively a eunuch. And he basically, he said, well, all right, I was 29, 30 when I made this decision. I was, however, psychologically impaired. I was a grown man with life experience. Just imagine what a child with no life experience, what choices a child can make, or what lies a child can create in his mind or her mind that will lead to this medicalization and then eventually the surgery as well. So that really made a difference. And the Minister of Health basically came out and said, all right, from now on, and that was last summer, the rapid onset gender dysphoria children will not get medical treatment anymore. And of course, they constitute the vast majority of treatments given in this country, as I'm sure they do in your countries as well. So in effect, it's an 80% reduction in child sex changes, which of course is very gratifying. However, we do need to hold the minister to that. So we have asked for freedom of information insight into what's been going on for this past year. I'm glad to say all this coincided with the creation of the Danish Rainbow Council, though I don't think I can take, or we can take full credit for it. I'm absolutely sure that we did put the discussion on the map. However, what they do wish to retain, which is completely unfathomable, and sometimes, honestly, as I'm sure you do, I think I'm up against like extraordinarily mad people, because what they want to do is keep doing this to the youngest kids, the early indicators, if you like. Kids who just sort of, and that's what remains. Those 20% ostensibly is what needs to be stopped still.
Yeah. I can't. The thing is, I can't even decide whether people are incredibly stupid or just evil. That's the thing.
I think honestly that Elder, that most of them probably want to do good. I just think they passed the point of no return. So and when you do that, full knowing that you are simply just so invested in that you can't turn back, well then this become evil, because you are aware of what the damage
you just can't face it, and this is probably what we will see in the aftermath of this. I'm very, very well aware that we will always have the parents who have been misled, and let's not forget, because they have been misled in doing this harm to their children. But the thing is, no parent would want to face up to having harmed their child. So they will always be the champions of this pseudo science, And
there are two, if I can just make that comment, there are two enormous misfortunes in a parent's life. One is having willingly contributed to the to the butchery that your child went through, and the other one is a parent who's lost a fight. Because here in Denmark, they get autonomy when they are 15, and of course, you'll find family that, as we've talked to parents who are in a puddle on the floor at the absolute horror of their child reaching the age of 15. Now, that's not a problem at the moment, because we did manage to stop the rapid onset gender dysphoria kids. But up until that point, this happened quite frequently, is that parents said no, and the sexology clinic, as it's called here in Denmark, the ones doing the medicalization of the children, said yes. And then they had autonomy and could do it, because that is the autonomy age. This is when you can get an abortion without your parents' consent and so on. So they just applied that to the so-called gender confirming care here as well, which of course is a travesty. So I mean, over the last few years, we've had like prime minister after prime minister, crying on TV, apologizing for different things that have been done to different people, like Greenlandic kids who were taken from their parents, so on and so forth. Horrible things that they have cried and apologized for. And I'm, absolutely sure I'm saying this to politicians in Parliament all the time. I just said that to our ministry, to Ministry of Education the other day. I said, because he's doing terribly well and he's a great politician. So you might be prime minister one day, and I'll just let you know that that's going to be on your to-do list.
This is to say,
cry on TV and apologize.
We have a little bit of the same track record in Iceland. Unfortunately, Iceland has a really, really, really bad track record in child protection cases. We have regularly, every 20, 30 years, a scandal emerges about how the government and we as people have mistreated children. We have, for example, a home that was called Breiðavik, and what else? We have the school for deaf children, and the list goes on and on. There have been so many different cases where everyone closes their eyes, put their fingers in the ears, and just go la 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 la, pretend it's not happening. And it's the same. It's the same here. But there's a question from a Norwegian journalist here, from Subject, and it's probably aimed at Mia and Stella, and actually Carrie could chip in on that one. It's the statement from Marcy Bowers. You probably have seen it, which Marcy Bowers is asking the staff of WPATH to churn out to every single journalist that is contacted WPATH today. Let me just read the statement. So the statement reads, WPATH is and has always been a science and evidence-based organization whose recommendations are widely endorsed by major medical organizations around the world. We are the professionals who best know the medical needs of trans and gender diverse individuals. We stand opposed to any individuals who misrepresents and delegitimize the diverse identities and complex needs of this population through scare tactics. The world is not flat. Gender, like genitalia, is represented by diversity. The small percentage of the population that is trans or gender diverse deserves healthcare and will never be a threat to the global gender binary. Do you have any comments or thoughts on that statement? So if we go first to Mia. Oh, actually, we can go first to you, Carrie. That's fine.
Oh, that's okay. I don't want to jump in. I'm a physician. Marcy Bowers is a physician. And I'll just tell you as a physician, that makes absolutely no sense as a practicing physician. Again, remember, we're in a phase where this is deep into medical practice where you're seeing patients. So we already talked about science, that they have tons of questions. We know through the systematic reviews, mostly, very well done in Europe and with your national health services, that it's low quality evidence. So that's not true. Evidence-based, remember, it's clear in the files, they don't know what the diagnosis is or who they're basically just treating anyone that shows up. Short of they said some person who was a terrible schizophrenic hallucinating in their office. But so it's not evidence-based because they don't even have theoretically found the unhappy future trans adult that they're trying to prevent being unhappy. So that doesn't, make sense. And then just again, widely endorsed by the major medical associations. I tried to give some context around that. Again, the organizations have just kind of passed the buck. And unfortunately, we've seen that a lot. And just they're the specialists. So they keep saying whatever WPATH says. So that's really a false, kind of elevation. And again, the files show that these major organizations in my country, the AMA, the American Academy of Pediatrics, Endocrine Society, I would think now that they see what's going on inside would not be supporting them. And then this other stuff is all just political stuff. This isn't when you're practicing medicine. There isn't an always every patient. If there's some guideline, you need to assess whether it's appropriate for your particular situation. It may not be for that patient. So this is just a political statement that's really showing that how damaging these files are to this, false sense that they have an idea of what they're doing. So pass it over to Mia or Stella.
Well, yeah, everything that Carrie just said, of course, if every systematic review to date shows that the evidence is low, you cannot call a treatment protocol evidence-based. So WPATH's president is just incorrect there. Science, if WPATH is sitting on a mountain of real science, control groups, follow-up, long-term data, now would be a good time to reveal it. And I appreciate being told that the world is not flat, and that gender, like genitalia, is represented by diversity, but I don't know. In my report, I suggest that WPATH is engaged in political activism, and I'm not sure how that statement is supposed to dispel my claim. It's obviously a political statement that really is absurd and makes absolutely no sense.
Can I add, it's inappropriate, arguably, for the president of WPATH to say we are the professionals who best know the medical needs of trans and gender diverse individuals, and stand opposed to individuals who misrepresent and delegitimize the diverse identities and complex needs of this population through scare tactics. Because I would argue, you know, organizations such as GenSpect and Fair for Medicine are very much supporting the rights for people to have diverse identities. And we are very, very supportive of the complex needs of this population. We're not using scare tactics. Instead, we are highlighting great wrongs that are being done. And people are being hurt. And rather than ignoring them, we are seeing this as the black box of the medical industry, that we have to look at this and examine what we've done wrong, be honest and have the integrity to say, actually, things have gone wrong here. Sometimes they do. Sometimes humans get swept along in medical scandals. It's happened before and it will happen again. We've had the lobotomy scandal. We've had the multiple personality disorder scandal. We've had many different scandals. And this is another one that has happened. And rather than having the integrity, which WPATH could have chosen to do, they could have chosen to have this day of reckoning and realize that they have lost their way. That, you know, as Mia recounts in the files, that the activists have taken over, the clinicians no longer have a strong voice, and ethics has been discarded. Rather than acknowledging this, they've instead decided to dismiss worries and concerns. And these are growing worries and concerns. And we now have what is effectively a smoking gun. We have the proof that they are dismissing it. And instead of acknowledging it, Marcy Barris has doubled down. It's a bad move. She should have acknowledged it.
And I'll just quickly jump in that to understand the theories behind how medical errors happen. And this is just a giant medical error on a massive, tragic scale. It's called the Swiss cheese effect. And it's just when all the normal processes that go on, that safety, diversity of opinion, making sure you're talking about adverse effects, making sure there's debate around best practices. When that's all gone, it's almost like all the holes in the Swiss cheese line up. And that's how a medical error happens, because it really, normally, you know, there's all kinds of guardrails, obviously, around medicine. And we've learned so much from the tragedies of the 20th century, whether it's Tuskegee and my country, where they're experimenting, you know, injecting syphilis and then not treating them with penicillin, you know, just because they wanted to see what would happen, you know, obviously Nazi Germany, where they're experimenting, and the other things that, you know, Mia had pointed out. So to understand why the Swiss cheese holes have lined up here is to understand that they don't have dissenting voices that feel strong enough to speak up inside the organization, except for people who are raising alarm bells, you know, and basically saying, hey, there's, you know, a problem, which is back to the importance of whistleblowers. When you have whistleblowers in anything, but especially medicine at this level, that's showing you those Swiss cheese holes have lined up, because there's the normal guardrails of people saying, wait a second, we don't just give kids hormones. We don't just not do informed consent. We don't call informed consent political names like cis-normative, blah, blah, blah. That's not how people talk in ethical medicine. So again, this shows the Swiss cheese holes have lined up and led to just this massive tragedy, you know, for these people being affected by this.
Can I make a quick comment regarding how to communicate to people about this? What we found absolutely when we started is that once you get into the whole discussion of the matter, because to people it seems extremely complicated, and of course the medical part of it is, we realize that fully, and it becomes a discussion whether or not, you know, he said, she said, or like they said, I'm going to remain in the vernacular. However, it's not complicated. It is not in any way difficult to understand. So what we did, after having dealt with politicians, media people, getting that glazed over look, once you start to get into it, whether children can consent, no they can't, no they can, yes, you know, no they can't, yes they can, and you sort of just get stuck there in a way, which we've all tried, because, you know, they have their reviews, you got your data, and so on and so forth. So what we just did was we said we need to be able to discuss this in a way that everybody can participate and understand what it is. So we devised 3 questions, which is not rocket science. However, it's done the world of difference in our communication here. So I'm going to put them in the chat, and we're going to tell them what they are now. They're really brief. So the first one is question 1, and these are yes or no questions. Question number 1: is there 100% certainty in the diagnosis of children with prepubertal or pubertal gender dysphoria? In other words, can we be sure that they will feel this way after puberty and for the rest of their lives? Yes or no? Question number 2: if the answer to that question is no, that we can't be sure, do we then just have to accept that some children will have their bodies ruined for life so that other children can receive the treatment earlier rather than having to wait until they are through puberty and grown up? Yes or no? Is that just something we'll have to accept as a society, that we knowingly do this to a certain portion of the children going into treatment? And if you say no to that question, then of course the only answer left is that, of course, then the treatment has to be stopped. If you say yes to that question, that we do have to sacrifice some children in order for other children to get their treatment that turns out to be right, well, then that, of course, exposes you as like a cynic, as something that unanswerable in our minds anyway. And I have to tell you that the leading doctor who does all this has said a clear yes to this question. She says, if nobody regrets, we are treating too few. She said this on the front page of one of our newspapers. And the head of the LGBT plus Denmark, a woman named Susanne Branner, said the same thing. She said, yes, we will like to accept that some children's lives are ruined unalterably because of this. And I think most people, normal people, would obviously say, no, this is not okay. And this is what will drive the change that we are seeking to effect, I think, because many people give up on understanding it, because people have all these long titles. They're medical doctors, they're psychologists, psychiatrists, and here I am, I'm a school teacher. Well, what do I know? Yeah, but you do know. You do know. You have ethics, you have morals. You have either religious morals or just for being a mensch. You wouldn't want this done to a kid, So I can heartily recommend this approach, because it shuts everybody up, because there is no other reasonable answer to question number 2 than no. Of course, we cannot do this knowingly to children just so that other kids can get a treatment earlier. So that would be my advice from Denmark.
Yeah, Tonya in Norway, what are your reactions after going through the files over the last couple of days?
Yeah, WPATH has been used to legitimize radical changes in law and health regulations in Norway. And we have all been told that we should trust WPATH, that they are the gold standard and the experts with the knowledge and solutions for the patient group with alleged gender identity. And by reading the files and observing the WPATH video meeting, I just get the impression that the WPATH guidelines are not designed to protect children, but to protect the doctors who perform indefensible and irreversible medical intervention on a vulnerable group of patients who are, in fact, unable to give their consent. And the states have a responsibility to take care of children, including young lesbian girls, who are like a large proportion of the group that seeks affirming treatment for their gender dysphoria. And a significant proportion of those who regret, like the detransitioners, they refer to being a lesbians as one of the reasons why they want so-called gender-affirming treatment. And I just recommend people to read the files themselves and watch the WPATH video and listen to it so they can judge for themselves. And in Norway, we have like one politician who is called Jenny Klinge. She's a Norwegian parliament representative, and she has tried to shed the light on this. And I think this report and its files is, as I see it, it's definitive proof that the WPATH is neither scientific nor advocating ethical medical care. And I expect policymakers, stakeholders, practitioners, and media to come forward and discuss where we go from here, and why this debate has been so delayed in Norway in particular. So
Yes,
and
because
I mean there has been a
also
lot of people talking.
Also because in Norway you can self-ID from the age of 6. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah. We have the most extreme self-ID law, I think, in the world, and we also have the hate crime law, and we have the ban on conversion therapy. So we are like we are referred to as like a best practice country in the IGLO document, and it has been no actual debate on it. And people who try to, it's like all the warnings, the red flags, the media and the politicians, they are ignoring them. And it's time. It's one word that has stuck in my mind that lots of people have used, and to be accountable.
Yes.
And to be responsible. No, you have everything you need. Watch it yourself, judge for yourself, and from there.
Why do they do this? I mean, how did this happen in Norway? I simply don't understand how they got through with. I think that you can get 6 years in jail for not conforming to the law against conversion therapy. 6 years. I mean, how did this? Are they scared? Did it happen because they didn't notice, or why?
Could I point out that a lot of small countries, such as Ireland, brought in self-ID in 2015. Malta, New Zealand has. So these small countries are being kind of almost, they're nodding along in very much. They're. I'm from a small country. I'm from Ireland, so I say it as. But we want to keep up, you know, and we are allowing. Incredibly, what is viewed as in terms, I'm very interested what Tanya says, but there was no debate when self-ID came into Ireland in 2015. Nobody heard about it. And you could only say that there's been a global campaign to bring about a series of laws that have not come from the grassroots. Nobody's looking for them. They're the hate speech laws, they're the conversion therapy laws, self-ID laws. They're very much a copy and paste from country to country, from New Zealand to Ireland to Iceland to Malta.
They are written by the same activists. I've seen that with the conversion therapy bills legislation put forward in various countries. It's the same writing. It's all the same. It's all the same activists.
And can I add that the pioneering countries to go back to the point of child medical transition, the pioneering countries, the countries that first brought them in, such as Holland, such as Sweden, are now bringing in some guardrails. They're now bringing in reviews. And so they realize that mistakes have been made. In Finland have brought in that they say psychotherapy should be the first line of defense for any child with gender-related distress. England is bringing in reviews. So all the countries that first hopped on it, especially in Western Europe, are now saying, and just recently, the Netherlands themselves, who brought in the entire concept of medicalizing children's identities, whether they were autistic or whether they could be one day become gay, lesbian, or bisexual, was discarded. And instead, this idea that medicalizing a child's identity and thereby putting them on a road to a medicalized life so that they would be infertile and have impaired sexual impairment, that was started in the Netherlands, and now they're bringing in a review. So the countries like Iceland and Ireland and Norway, the smaller countries who are nodding along, really need to start looking to the pioneers and realize reviews are happening, and we are going to end up with egg in our face.
Yeah.
Sorry
Well,
to
we
jump
have
in, Tanya.
we have a legal uncertainty here in Iceland now because they did introduce a ban of conversion therapy bill, but because I was on them for quite some time, they rushed back into the committee and banned all non-evidence-based and all non-evidence-based practices, and changing someone's gender or cutting them to make them look like something they are not. That's conversion therapy against homosexuality. So there, I have a case to argue that these practices are actually, illegal and should be tried to see how far I could get with the courts in proving that.
Yeah, and
Eldur,
there's
oh, sorry.
Oh no, I'm sorry, Jasper. I was just gonna say there's a part in the I can't remember, it's a video or one of the chats where they acknowledge that there are patients they're seeing that are very well, are unsure about their sexual, identity in terms of their sexual attraction. So knowing that you could be purposely doing this to folks who are going to identify as gay or lesbian is just ties to a barbaric time where there would be forced hormone, like Alan Turing in England, like forced hormone treatments and horrible things. So it's just, you can't deny it. It's right there. I know so many, again, people have worked on it, raising these concerns, but it's right there in their own statement. So I don't know how the legislatures and the states and the medical bodies could say, oh, we still just blindly endorse these people. It just really is a seminal moment and stopping this. But yes, this conversion therapy, it's actually, they're doing the conversion therapy when they know a giant cohort of these patients are same-sex attracted.
We went to a meeting with the Danish Minister for Equality. So they had a group of civil servants working on exactly what Tanya was talking about, what they've done in Norway with the ban on conversion therapy. Now they're not actually planning to do it. They're doing a feasibility study, and we were there to chip in, give advice. And of course, what we did was just that, and we said this is basically the conversion therapy is exactly how you define it. It is actually transing gay people away. It's medicalizing gay people into some kind of mad gender experiment. And what we also always say is that there are no trans children. It's not a thing. Exactly. They're only children. Yeah. Children who go through different phases in life, challenges. Growing up can be really hard, but it's not a disease. Puberty is not an illness. So there are no trans children. It's simply not a thing. And I can tell you, Eldur, what they're doing here, LGBT plus Denmark, is highly insidious, very sinister people. Now that they've cut back on the RGD, rapid onset gender dysphoria kids, so they can't get treatment anymore, what they do now is that they have their own thing going. They created something called the Aura Network, within which is something called Transit. And you can get into transit if you've been rejected by the medical authorities here. And what they do is they lead you on to Gender GP. I'm sure you know this place.
They don't have even license to practice, and they still are practicing online, which is shocking.
So they're horrible people. I mean, these are terrible, terrible people. So basically what they do is they sort of line up and say, all right, you got no there, but you can do a pay as you go, where they will basically diagnose you, and you can pick your meds up at a Danish pharmacy and self-administer. So and these people are still involved. I mean, LGBT plus Denmark and the I'm sure still in the group that are now reworking the treatment guide.
I am sure this is happening here as well, yes, but because we have no data, because the state hospital in Iceland says we are not doing surgeries on minors, and we are only administering puberty blockers for children less than 15 years old. 15 years old, that's the point they get puberty blockers. And I know this is absolute BS. It's absolute nonsense. And for those
is.
people who actually do not get the treatment that they will, or they claim that there are too long waiting lists, etc., we have no data of how many children have been taken out of the country for surgical and hormonal and medical intervention in the United States or elsewhere in the world. We have no data. And we know this is happening because we know of a couple of cases. We know this is happening, but we have no data. So the problem could be even much bigger than we dare to think, even.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, because for the question, Jesper, it was no debate in Norway of the self-ID when it was included in law, and the explanation, and they said this is something that only concerns a tiny little group of the population, so it doesn't affect anyone. So that's what was like one of the reasons. And it, I mean, lesbians or women's rights, how it affected their needs and rights wasn't even considered. And some of the problem is the same as everywhere. The media doesn't want to discuss it. And also, like just a week ago, the Norwegian parliament, they fund the LGBTQI organizations with 36 million crowns, and that gives them this opportunity to continue telling the narrative, while women, I'm just a lesbian, trying to make sense out there, and it's like so difficult to get your voice out there, and if you do, it's like you're compared to Nazis or racists or things like this. So it's like, but I think every time documents like this, these files from WPATH, they're there. So it's like at one point the politicians, the media, the people responsible in power, they can't explain their ignorance by saying we didn't know. Because if you don't know by now, it's because you don't want to read these files. You don't want to know, and that's not an accountable adult person or a politician. So I also think, and for me, it's like a woman in Norway called Anne Kalvik, she wrote a book where she presents gender identity as a metaphysical and undefinable idea. And this is where lots of women are standing in Norway. And it's like, for me, as a lesbian who was a tomboy, just like Stella, and I was everybody thought I was a boy, but I was so lucky I grew up in a time where it was appreciated when girls broke the stereotypical gender role thing. But I don't did I lose what I have to say now? But and I think what we are doing today is we are there's for me it's like a mental we are treating mental diseases with this horrible changing the body. So I think to strengthen the psychological care I mean, to be a puberty hurts for almost every girl. So it's like to help girls get through and explain this. The body is totally changing. You're going from a child to a woman. Suddenly you're so it's I just think I think everybody are trying to explain and put out the evidence that we need to look at this and that. And I just hope at some point politicians find it appropriate to look at the files and find out what
they say
it's
politics is downstream of culture, which I really agree with, and I think culture is changing. I'm not sure. Do you feel the same? Everyone here?
I mean, this is nothing short of a sexual lobotomy scandal, if you ask me. You know, so
could I take to that question that for Mia or anyone else, a professor of sexology from Norway associated to WPATH, that claims WPATH is subject to a massive campaign from anti-trans activists, and then asks, are the WPATH files driven forward by any sort of activist? Now, I'm sure Mia can speak to this, but Michael Schellenberger, he's very well known for leaking the Twitter files. He's very well known speaking around the truth around climate change. And he was given the files, and he chose Mia only because of her very informed, nuanced, very complex understanding of this issue. And he chose to work with myself in GenSpect and Carrie in Fair for All for those reasons. This is so far from an activist-driven campaign. This is really trying to bring to light a terrible scandal that has happened. Maybe Mia might want to add.
I was just going to quickly say, just to tack on to that again, I'm a practicing physician, and this is well deep into the practice of medicine. The activists and people who have taken the tools of medicine and use them for their ideologic purposes are the activists. In medicine, we don't do these kind of things to people. So I think, again, I want to enforce that this is at a different phase now. It isn't, about, great points, Jasper, about like, how do you communicate this? This isn't like, oh, there's, confidence intervals in a study and all this. People's eyes do glaze over. This is, you're going to a clinic or a hospital. The parents with distressed kids are taking them there because normally it was a relationship in a place of trust for safety, for cleanliness, for best practices. And then once they're in there, the people either are they believe this, or they're scared to speak out because they've been bullied. So it's not the people speaking out now, like someone like me. I'm a practicing physician. This is hurting people. I will be seeing these people in the ER with the complications, with the cancers later on. None of these people, including Marcy Bowers or any of them, will be with me in the ER dealing with this. So this isn't activists. This is the brave people speaking out saying you are hurting people. That's all that this is. You have to understand it's a medical problem now.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, I just wanted to add in there, what we are also seeing in this, with the patient group that goes through these surgeries, many of them who have complications, they are also scared of speaking up themselves because they are scared of being excommunicated by the rest of the cohorts.
That's activists and bullies. When during the opioid crisis, we used to call the people that would come in who were addicted and inappropriately wanting narcotics, we'd call them narco bullies. These are like gender bullies. You don't shame patients. You don't hurt a patient that go, oh, it's their fault. That's not activism. That's just, you're a caring doctor who wants this to stop, and the other people want it to stop inside the hospital and clinics.
And I'd like to add, there's nothing anti-trans about the report, because it's all it calls for is better care for people who identify as transgender. So I think that people who identify as transgender deserve to have access to evidence-based care. They deserve to have access to doctors who are practicing science, not ideologically driven medicine. And as well, in the report, I use the case study of ovariotomy, which in the 19th century, they would remove the healthy ovaries of women as a means to cure their mental illness, completely pseudoscientific. And at the time, people who were opposed to that were accused of being wanting in humanity. You were a bad person if you were opposed to that. And we now know that it was completely pseudoscientific. It was not beneficial at all, and it harmed a lot of women. The same if you go to the 1980s, the multiple personality disorder epidemic and the satanic panic. If you spoke out against those two scandals, you were anti-women, pro-child abuse. You may even have been accused of being a child abuser yourself. We now know, with hindsight, that both of those scandals were entirely based on malpractice on the part of therapists, and they both collapsed in an avalanche of lawsuits. So the people raising the alarm are often accused of being bad people, being bigots, by the people causing the harm. But I believe history is going to show that there's nothing anti-trans about wanting to protect a vulnerable cohort from a field of medicine that has lost its ethical compass.
Well said indeed. I have a question
I have to
from.
say we've made a little. Oh, sorry.
I have a question from one here in the audience, and she would like to know what is the youngest age of a person transitioning, to your knowledge? And this goes to everyone on the panel.
Well, to be clear, children can't medicalize their identities until they hit puberty. So until puberty, so young children from as young as 2 and 3 are socially transitioning, which is not a medical intervention. However, it does certainly have a very influential shaping of the child's sense of their identity, because if a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old, we saw with Jazz Jennings, move from seeing themselves as a little boy who likes to wear dresses to being a little girl who goes to the girls' changing rooms and is referred to by she, her, it carries a hell of a lot of weight. However, the actual system would be that you would socially transition the child at any age they wish when they declare it. Then when they hit Tanner stage 2 at puberty, in and around 10, 11, 12 years age, they would block puberty with puberty blockers, and this would stop sexual development. So any chance of this child realizing that they might be gay or lesbian or bisexual would be prevented. Their sexual development will stop, so their understanding of their peers is blocked. They don't seek those crushes. I'm a psychotherapist. There's a huge cognitive value in having crushes and falling in love in your teen years. You're listening to love songs. You're identifying into a kind of a concept of one day finding a mate, and the love kind of thing that so many of us have lived our lives by, and then ultimately, hopefully in your 20s or 30s, you do find a mate. With the blockage of puberty blockers, that doesn't get awakened. The sexual development doesn't happen. Your yearning for a mate doesn't happen. And then depending on the country, either 16 or 18, you would then take cross-sex hormones. In America, it could be as young as 13. I'm sure Carrie could speak to that. And you'd get cross-sex hormones, which would literally, you would grow breasts if you're a male, or you would masculinize your identity. Then you'd have medical procedures, usually from the age of 18 onwards, such as surgeries, genital surgery, mastectomies. That's the timeline. But it's younger in America, and it depends on the country. There isn't protocols that are accepted, because these are extreme body modification procedures for children that has no evidence base, and that are only really happening in the last 10, 15 years.
I've had a really, really big row with media here. Our state broadcaster, who was propping up a young female artist who I suppose defines as non-binary, and it was all the plight of her having to go to Sweden to have her breasts removed because Danish health authorities wouldn't approve it and pay for it. So that was the story. There was no critical angle into, what could possibly be at stake, body dysmorphia, all the other things that are obviously at stake in a woman like that. No, it was simply just the story of her realizing herself being reborn as a woman with no breasts, and they propped this up in state media, which we were aghast, obviously, and it's been highly criticized. But it just goes to prove that there is absolutely an infection of this on all levels, like a car crash, where you sort of have to pick out the windshield from the face of somebody who's been in it, and that's the way we look at it. So we're picking them away one by one. And what we have done is that basically there was another story, our other state broadcaster, TV2, did another story and the headline of that story was Leo because of a long wait, Leo had to go to Sweden to get his mastectomy. You know, he's a trans boy, a girl, biological girl, a woman. You know, and I said no, no. Serious mental illness prompted Leo to go to Sweden to have his breasts removed. And then I had a long interchange with them. And basically I ended saying, all right, can we come out? Can we bring our medical advisor, who's a psychiatrist who works with children and young people, and a mother and some parents for kids in this situation? I'll be there. Therapist will be there. And we'll meet, it's like after hours meeting with all your journalists at TV2 and give you the other side of the story. And they say yes. So we're organizing that now. And of course, you know, they can write whatever they want, but they do need to be informed. And I find that media are extremely ill-informed. I think they have an ideological slant as well, but they are humans. I mean, you can talk to them and they can see a reason. And now we're trying to give them a good helping of that.
Good job. Anyone else want to answer that question about children transitioning? No?
I just think it shows, you know, just this trend. And I think, you know, in our country, Abigail Schreyer's just come out with a book, Bad Therapy. But, you know, there's these trends that have been going on for a long time to medicalize emotional difficulties with pills. You know, we're you know, big pharma, you know, here. And, you know, I've seen over my 25 years of practice, you know, again, in the emergency department, the mental health problems that have gotten out of hand, or if someone has suicidal thoughts or is so agitated, they come to the ER as the front door in our country. So, and I've just seen younger and younger, you know, kids, you know, 5-year-olds on ADHD medications. You know, I mean, just the definition of these disorders, and then once they get a diagnosis, it's tied to a pill in our country, in the States. And I think this phenomenon obviously has a lot of tentacles, but that's one of them. And in some of the detransitioners I've spoken with have said, oh yeah, I was put on, you know, ADHD med and antipsychotic meds. They're diagnosing them as bipolar at age 10. I mean, it sounds all the same, right? And then when they started with the gender dysphoria issue, it was just the same pattern. They went to a hospital. They told them, oh, you have a pill and this other stuff that goes with it, or injections. And I think just, you know, well-meaning parents, and again, if we want to say well-meaning pediatricians who are tasked with doing all these screening tools now, and if they don't do it, the hospital says they, you know, could be fired or lose their bonus. And it all fits into this pattern. So when this came along, again, younger and younger, you know, ADHD meds were for adults. Then all of a sudden you start seeing kids on them, boys who are just normal boys, but are put on meds because they can't sit still in class. So I think, yes, we're seeing younger and younger, and some of these things in the file show that, you know, a 10-year-old and, you know, other things like that, or a developmentally delayed 13-year-old. How could, you know, obviously a developmentally delayed 13-year-old, they can't give consent because of their age, but they've got some cognitive issue. But then you start thinking, what parent is taking them? Again, I'm not assigning them bad motives, but is some of this like, well, they don't know how to handle things, or things are difficult with behaviors, and people are looking for easy solutions, and they've been trained to think that there's a pill, a diagnosis and a pill, and in the surgeries, and you see the carnage that is associated with it. So yes, it's going younger and younger, which is the pattern.
Yeah, I was just given a document here by a member of the audience that they are even promoting the whole rainbow and different gender identities in schools from the age of 1
Oh,
to 1 to 10. Yeah.
Yeah, but I
So
think it's like also all this education from gender identity people who promote, like queer organizations and everything. It's like people are really getting confused, and the language and how it develops also confuse people. And it's in Norway, a professor in biology, he actually now had to write a book about the fact that there is only two sexes, because people think people are like adults also, and are like believing that there are many sexes. So it's like it's I mean, the education system is like confusing people, and it's also like with all this talk respectful about this and that, people are like afraid what I can't speak because I don't know longer which words are allowed to use. So people are withdrawn from the conversation that we should all engage in, because it affects all of us.
It's because the medicine has been infected with quasi-religious doctrine, and when we are criticizing it, and the legislations they try to put forward to prevent us legislating it is actually just new form of 21st century blasphemy laws. To be honest, that's where we are at. But I would like to start rounding off this meeting. I think it's been a good discussion. I would like to ask everyone: can WPATH continue to exist, and what can we do, respectively, in our own regions? To convince, for example, in my case, the chief medical officer of Iceland and government bodies, same for Denmark and Norway, that they need to cut all ties with WPATH.
I think that WPATH has been discredited irretrievably. I think this is the beginning of the end. When people read the files, they'll read Mia's beautiful report that gives an analysis of WPATH from the beginning. This was a fringe organization that was bestowed a huge amount of power through a lot of funding, really. And since, roughly 2007 onwards, when they changed from the fringe organization, the Harry Benjamin Institute for Gender Dysphoria Association, to the self-identified World Authority, which is the World Professional Association of Transgender Healthcare. When they changed to that in 2007, there's been a sea change. They became completely overrun by trans activists. And that's what they should be known as. This is an activist-led organization. They need to be discredited, and it needs to be quite clear that this is what they are. It's a group of activists. Well,
these are activists, not professionals.
It's an activist-led. Professional organizations are coming through. There's a range of them. Fair for All is one of them. Environmental Progress is another, all with different kind of strengths and different focuses. GenSpect is another. There's many new organizations. Jesper's organization is coming through. There's many organizations that are coming through. And we're basically challenging this idea that this frankly, all it is an old organization, because they were there at the beginning. It doesn't mean that they have the appropriate concerns that people should have for children and vulnerable people and mentally ill people.
And I'll say from Denmark that we absolutely have to cut ties with them. The Royal Hospital here, Rigshospitalet, and Danish health authorities advertised that they follow the standards of care of WPATH. And it seems ridiculous to me that, and they're absolutely sure they can't keep this up. And we're going to do our damnedest to make sure that they do cut ties and that this is abolished completely, and some other treatment found. I mean, I have to say, just when I have the chance, I find myself in an extremely distinguished company here, and I'm so full of admiration of the fight that you guys have been taking on for such a long while, longer than I have. I'm sort of a latecomer in the game, only like the last 4 years, and then 2 years since we did the Danish Rainbow Council. But people often ask you, I'm sure, how do you even dare having this take on this fight, because it can be very dangerous to your career and in other ways as well. And I don't know. I suspect you might be a little like me in that you sort of just. There's a captain in the Royal Guards who said to me, it is when we send you to war, just accept that you're already dead. Then you can do the work that we pay you to do. which I thought was rather callous, but I understood what he meant, is that if you just sort of pre-accept that going into this war as it is, I mean, war is hell, even when it's a woke one, that you are already dead, then you can actually stay pretty calm in it. And that's what I see in every face here. This is sort of just, yeah, spring it. We know we're right. We know we are on the right side of history in this. And so just come whatever you have, I will bloody fight you tooth and nail, because this is a hill worth dying on. And that's what I kind of see in everyone here. So you kind of know your brethren when you see them. And so I just want to thank you. I'm like beyond.
We wouldn't be
being full
proper
of
gay
praise,
men.
everyone.
We wouldn't be proper gay men, Jesper, if we couldn't take a pounding.
That's very true. Yeah.
Well,
That's succinctly put, Eldor.
Yeah.
So there we go.
Well, you guys are really incredible, and I'm so impressed by all of you. I mean, really, it's so great. For me, you know, as a physician, I went through, I went through medical school, all these things which were fantastic, great training, and then early in my career was the opioid crisis, and it was my first time where, like, patients wanted things that weren't ethical. And what I found was the whole administration of the hospital and the regulators were more, they just had to follow the rules, which were, they have to have great pain scores. And I'm like, wait a second, this is unethical. The hospital should be backing me up. And that was the first time I realized that is not always going to be the case. But my duty is to do what's right for the patient. And in this consumer age with these things going on, a lot of times that means being unpopular and saying no. I've had people yell at me. I've had people tell me I'm a horrible person because I won't say yes to things that are wrong. I've had hospital administrators complain about me, but you know what? I sleep with a clear conscience. I cannot use my powers of practicing medicine to do the wrong thing. And you have to be comfortable saying no. Do I get some special award for that? No, but that's not the point. That's not why I'm entrusted with a medical license to get I just think, again, with FAIR and then with Stella and what Mia and Michael Schellenberger have done is working with the people who are just, bring more people in to shed light, help us have moral courage together, and just keep plodding forward and until this stops. It's just having a conscience and being ethical to me.
Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, my advice is, I think each and one are like responsible to like find out what is actually happening. So I just repeat that I think I recommend that people should read the files and watch and listen to the leaked WPATH meeting, and then they can judge for themselves. And then, because after watching and reading those files, I think you will get another perspective. So, but at least read them and watch the video. That's the least people can do.
Yeah. So, any final words from you, Mia?
Well, I echo everything that everyone's just said. Read the files, read the report. It's time for national health authorities to step up and reject WPATH's guidelines entirely, look at the evidence, set your own guidelines, protect this vulnerable cohort. And it's very much the job of journalists. I encourage journalists to read this report, read the files. This is your job. Report on a medical scandal.
Absolutely.
Vulnerable people are coming to terrible harm. Let's get the word out there and let's stop this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for participating in this quite extraordinary press conference. And I would thank everyone here for attending. So, thank you very much, guys. And let's keep up the good work, and we're going to win this.
Yeah,
Thanks,
we
everyone.
will.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Bye.
Have a
God
great
bless.
day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.